Hi, seventh graders, and welcome to Monday, February 1st. It is hard to believe that we are in February, but we are, and today we are doing Lesson 54, using the active and passive voice. So if you'll turn to page 250 in your book, this lesson will probably not be terribly long. We actually learned the majority of what we need to know about active and passive in our class last Wednesday. So today is just focusing a little bit more on using it and when to consider using passive and when to consider using active. So let's take a look at the gray box, and I've got it on the screen, and you can also look at it in your book. The active voice is more direct and forceful than the passive voice. And there is something about using a helping verb that seems to take the edge off of the more direct usage, the active voice usage. We talked about that the other day because I said that I tend to use passive a little bit more, and that is not uncommon with someone who writes or is writing persuasively. It seems like the edge is a little bit less when you use passive. Passive voice may be suitable when there is no clear doer of the action, or when there's a good reason not to name the doer of the action. So really not a whole lot of new information. We're just going to go through some of what is in the book, and then we'll do some class practice just to make sure you understand, but we won't be on this video long. So take a look at page 251, and I have pulled up a couple of examples from this page, and they show this this piece about not having the forceful communication. So here, the first sentence, Africa has been divided into many countries. Well, there's no clear answer as to who divided, and so there's not that sort of action that we need to clarify. Passive voice is suitable on this. In the next one, reptiles are hatched from tough shelled eggs. Remember, we often have prepositional phrases that get tacked on after a passive, and that's what we've got here. But if we take a look at this, and this is at the bottom of page 251, reptiles hatch from tough shelled eggs. So actually, we don't add a direct object here. Reptiles hatch is your subject and verb. That's really all you need. There's not any action being passed to a direct object. Instead, it's passed back to reptiles. But again, we have a prepositional phrase that's popping up in there. All right, I often say that it is better to actually do the class practice than it is to try and listen to me just continue to drone on. So let's take a look at the class practice. I'd like for you to hit pause for a second, and I'd like for you to do 1 through 6. And then we'll come back and I will give you the answers to those. So if you're back, I assume that you've done 1 through 6. We have here, it says read each sentence, changing the verb to active. Do not change the tense. So we have here that the people had been deceived by false teachers. Now remember, I suggested, I believe it was the day that I had the check-in and we did homework, there were 4 of you there, that we look for the subject in the prepositional phrase. So if we look for the subject in the prepositional phrase, we would probably begin with false teachers. And we could say something like false teachers had deceived the people. So that's how we can change that one. Let's look at number 2. These verses will be memorized by the students. And again, we're going to pull the subject out of the prepositional phrase. We're going to bring it to the front. And we'd say something like the students will memorize these verses. Number 3, the Apostle Paul wrote a number of New Testament epistles. That's actually how I would correct it. Sorry, I read the wrong thing. Let me read the original sentence. A number of New Testament epistles were written by the Apostle Paul. To change that, we would take Paul and put him in as the subject. The Apostle Paul wrote a number of New Testament epistles. Number 4, the flowers were planted by Mother this morning. Again, we're going to pull it out probably from a prepositional phrase. It's going to bounce over here, and we'd say something like, Mother planted the flowers this morning. Number 5, these bicycles have been fixed by Father, and instead we would say Father has fixed these bicycles. In all of these, we're pulling the subject from this prepositional phrase. Number 6, a stirring message has been preached by Brother Mervyn, and instead we would say Brother Mervyn has preached a stirring message. So basically we're taking the subject from the end and popping it to the beginning of the sentence. Okay, let's take a look at B. And I want you to hit pause for a moment and then come back when you're ready, and I'll go over. All right, so if you're back, I assume that you have finished up B, and let's go over those. So it says to say yes or no to tell whether the passive voice in each sentence is suitable. If it isn't, read the sentence with the verb in the active voice. Jonah, the disobedient prophet, was cast into the water by the sailors. So I think no on this one, and instead we would say something like the sailors cast Jonah, the disobedient prophet, into the water. I think we can go with fewer words there. And remember, I've also mentioned that a lot of times passive uses more words. Number 2, Christ was sought by multitudes from the towns of Galilee. And this is also a no. And instead we would say multitudes from the towns of Galilee sought Christ. Number 3, the early church was severely persecuted. This is probably fine. You could also say the early church suffered from severe persecution. So there are things that you can do to change it. All right. The next one is number 4. Lazarus was raised from the dead by Jesus. And this one should probably be in active form. So we're going to say no. And instead, we'll say something like Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Number 5, a large crowd was fed with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Again, that's a little wordy, and we want to get rid of some of the wordiness. So we would say Jesus fed a large crowd with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And then number 6, the last donuts have already been eaten. This one is fine. So we'll leave that one alone. Next, some new books have been bought for the school library. This one also seems to be fine. And we'll just leave it alone. And the last one, the dog was fed by Karen. And we're going to change that one to say Karen fed the dog. So sometimes it's perfectly fine to use the passive. Sometimes it's better to use the active. I would say use a variety in your writing, and then you should be fairly balanced. So that's really all I have for today. Not a whole lot of new material, and hope this helps you as you are completing your homework. And we will plan to see you on Wednesday.